As mentioned, my name's Oliver. I currently work as a project manager within Students Organising for Sustainability UK. And what that means is I get to basically work with like a massive variety of colleges and universities, both in the UK and internationally, to support them, staff and students with embedding sustainability and climate justice into their education. Today's session or workshop will be focused on how FE colleges and can take part in the SDG Teach In. Just usual housekeeping bits. As mentioned, this webinar or workshop has been recorded and we will share it afterwards. If you have any questions or comments or reflections, feel free to put those in the chat. There will be time throughout as well to ask any questions and for some discussion. And as usual, of course, we're all adults, but please do remember to be kind and respect people's and their opinions. It would also be really lovely if you could just put in the chat as I go through this admin stuff, what your name is, which institution you're coming from, and maybe your role or what you teach, and also what brought you here today. It's always nice to know who's in our shared cyberspace. So just quickly on the agenda, so we'll give a quick introduction into what is the SDG Teach In. We'll then cover the Sustainable Development Goals, and facets of education for sustainable development. And then the bulk of this session is mostly on quite specific guidance for how you can integrate the world of sustainability into existing curricula, as well as some examples and case studies of doing that in practice. And then we'll also share advice for engaging staff and students with the teach-in and other ways that SOS UK can support you with doing this. Just thank you for those that have just joined us in the call. Feel free to put in the chat who you are and maybe what subjects you teach or what your role is or institution. That'd be really nice. Thank you. So just to really briefly introduce SOS UK as a charity. So we're a student-led charity that was formed in 2019. And our mission is basically to be the support crew so that all students around the world can be the change they want to see. And we do that by delivering a very, very large variety of projects and campaigns, all the way from early years to schools, colleges, universities, and trade unions. Some of the topics that we cover, just a really small snapshot, are things like biodiversity literacy training, housing justice and energy efficiency, as well as things like farming for carbon and nature on college-owned farmland, and things like decolonizing education and working with trade unions on this. Just to get us I guess warmed up a little bit, we have a Slido poll on the screen. If you have a smartphone on you, if you just scan that QR code, you'll be taken to slido.com. And then if you just type in hashtag 3963926, you'll see this question. And our question for you at the moment is, why might education be important for sustainability? So pretty much thinking perhaps your own perspectives or what you've seen elsewhere. You can also access this Slido on your web browser. If you just type in slido.com, you'll get this question. Also, all of the responses to this poll are completely anonymous, so we can't track who said what. Feel free to just write a couple lines or one line or a couple words. No pressure to write an essay. There's no time for that. But as much as I would love to read it, we don't have that time. So just a short snippet is fine. And if you can't see the poll for any reason, feel free to just write it in the chat instead. That's fine. Nice. So there's someone who's put to protect future generations and being more resourceful. Yeah, certainly. A really big part to sustainability is that temporal or time dimension. It's not just about the now and the present, but very much the future and also past in some ways. Change the way people think about our futures. Yeah, I mean, so much of the issues we see around the world kind of can limit our like imagination abilities, and there's some big need for us to be creative in the worlds that we want to build, and education clearly plays a big role in that. And yeah, sharing reliable information for informed decisions. Yeah, I quite like that information part of it. We all know, of course, the nightmares of social media and what can be like misinformation, disinformation. And again, education can be a great tool for equipping learners on ways to navigate that kind of treacherous online world and avoid those issues as well. Cool. So yeah, feel free to keep adding to that as well. And you might also have other ideas to add for during the workshop. I guess another question then for you lot then is what challenges then might there be with integrating sustainability into education? Um, it is a big topic. Sustainability as a whole is a big topic. You could spend just your whole life trying to navigate that field. It's always evolving. And when things always evolve, it can also create new challenges or change existing ones as well. This can also be challenges you might face yourselves in your own day-to-day work, or obstacles that might be preventing you or slowing you down with integrating sustainability, as well as things you might have seen elsewhere. And for those that have just joined us, we're just doing a quick starter poll to get us thinking about the big messy world of education and sustainability. Feel free to scan that QR code or put in your web browser and then that hashtag code, and you can join in as well. Yes, so getting teachers on board and making it relatable to a range of subjects. Yeah, that is bang on. I guess two parts within that, but yeah, that bit about making it relatable. We don't want to just like embed sustainability in a very like generic way, like a one size fits all approach. There's no such thing, especially given how like different our own institutions and sectors can work. But also with subjects, like every subject has its own like unique perspectives and approaches to sustainability. And there's a need to highlight how, therefore, we should also sort of ensure that the ways we do it is bespoke to our subjects and the like talk content and objectives. Um, nice. So, um, yeah, so like resourcing or time pressures, and the issues of like how you can keep students engaged in the long term. We'll be definitely reflecting back on some of these challenges and hopefully some like guidance for how you might want to sort of address them or go about approaching them. This bit about like, I guess, teachers or staff lacking knowledge on sustainability or maybe like the like capabilities to embed it. Again, that's also so important for like when we talk about sustainability in education, it's not just from like a student's perspective, it's also for staff as well. So things like continuing professional development, staff capacity building, and things like that. Just to add, I guess, some other challenges as well that we've noted, that we know like the sector as a whole is facing various, of course, financial and continuity challenges in this space. We also know that the latest EAUC States of the Sector 2025 report on like the sort of like context within post-16 education, that revealed how like about a third or so of further and higher education institutions, despite these challenges that they're facing, they do still view environmental sustainability and social responsibility as a way to enhance teaching and learning. But of course, there is still like loads of support still needed on things like capacity building and skills and training, peer learning and collaboration, as well as that like whole organization approach, and instilling this within leadership roles as well. Right. Um, so yeah, I'm just going to now move on to what is the SDG Teach In for those that may not be aware. Also, just a reminder to please keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. So I just did that. Great. So yeah, so the Teach In is basically an annual campaign that we've been running since 2018 to support and encourage educators around the world with integrating the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals into their teaching, learning, or assessment. And since 2018, we've reached around like nearly 600,000 learners across 50 or so countries. In 2025, we had around like over 1,000 educators pledged to take part in the teach-in. It reached almost 100 like institutions spanning schools and colleges, universities, student unions, as well as like technical, vocational, and educational training providers. And again, at that global reach, reaching about 17 countries. And again, about 120,000 or so learners reached. So not just through like classes, but also actual like events or workshops or like external collaborations that institutions might have organized as well. There are several reasons why you like benefits to getting involved with the teaching, and they speak to not only the campaign as in itself, but also very much the wider priorities of your own institutions as well. So one of them is to very much like either get started or go further with integrating sustainability and environmental justice into your education. We say get started, meaning like for those that are perhaps more sort of new or fresh to like the world of sustainability and what it means for education, but also for those that are already on this journey or at different levels of it, and they still want to find ways to amplify that and showcase it and learn from others as well. The teaching is also a really great way to like complement and maintain momentum on wider agendas. So both within and beyond your institutions. So just some examples include, for example, the Department for Education's Climate Action Plan targets for all education settings. Also the EAUC's Further Education Climate Action Roadmap. The teaching or the Global Goals teaching is listed as one of the like activities sort of relevant to those on like the established side of that roadmap. But I'd also say that the teaching can be adopted at any level during that roadmap, given how broad and sort of synergetic it can be with your activities. And then we also have the quite recent AO Association of Colleges FE Just Transition Framework. We'll get into that a bit later and how that relates to the teaching, but very much just highlighting there are different ways that this teaching can be strategically leveraged to support and progress other agendas. Another benefit of being involved is that really for us as well, this is like the heart of it. It's about equipping learners of all ages with that confidence, the readiness, and willingness to act for a more just, healthier, and happier future. Also, yeah, for yourselves to like share and inspire others of how you're already sort of embedding or weaving sustainability into education. And finally, demonstrating your leadership in this space. As a form of like friendly competition, we have these leaderboards that we'll be publishing throughout March, which look at top 10 institutions with number of learners reached and number of like educators signed up in proportion to the size of those organizations. And in terms of like what tangible impacts students have had through taking part in teaching themselves, every year in the teaching, we survey students that are involved towards the end of the campaign. And since like the past, since 2018, we found that almost all of the students that we surveyed identified skills or attributes that the teaching helped them to develop. And the most popular ones are things like communication, critical thinking, and taking action on sustainability. We also found that before the teaching, only about maybe a half of those students had like knew about or heard of the SDGs in the past. But then after the teaching, or the majority of them were able to like, identify the specific goals that were covered in their learning experience from that campaign. And then finally, just backing up what we know from wider research that I'll get into a bit later, the majority also agree that the issues covered in the Sustainable Development Goals should be embedded throughout all levels of education. So it's not enough just to rely on like typical green subjects like geography or the sciences. This was a really nice quote from last year from a student, and they said how the most important thing I learned during teaching was the power of understanding different perspectives and how essential it is to listen with empathy and an open mind. It taught me that meaningful change starts with awareness and the willingness to engage in conversations that challenge our assumptions. And I really like this quote for many different reasons. I guess the top one is that bit on like empathy and compassion. That can be like an overlooked side to sustainability, but we know how important a values-led approach to these topics can be, especially when like we all can have our own like reasons why we're interested in this field in the first place. So I guess that's like a very brief overview of the teaching so far. Just to, I guess, delve a little bit more into the framework the main framework we use for this campaign, which is the Sustainable Development Goals. So sustainable development is often like defined by the United Nations as like development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the needs of future generations. So very much going back to whoever wrote that bit on the slider about time and like generational needs and resources. Of course, as well, this isn't just about people or humans. It's also very much about future lives of other animals, like the modern human world, plants, ecosystems, and so on, and that they also deserve a future where they can flourish as well. And so, as mentioned, we, for the past 15 years, have been surveying students on what they think about sustainability, skills, and education. And last year, we surveyed almost 10,000 students in further and higher education. And of those students, we found that a lot of their like perspectives corroborate the need to embed sustainability meaningfully in education. So many of them said that their place of study should like actively teach skills and understanding and knowledge that positively impact society and the environment. Again, we also know that the majority want sustainable development as something that's embedded and actively promoted in all courses. It's not enough just to have like those silos because if it was down to just a couple of disciplines or subjects to solve our challenges, then we wouldn't be in this call today. And then also really interesting is that only about less than 40% of students have had issues like social justice, climate change, or the influence of colonialism covered in their teaching, and even less for the latter. I wanted to highlight that in this call because these are some really like sort of like central topics that intersect with all of the SDGs, and there's a massive need to like ensure that they are like woven out throughout our curricula as well. So just these are the United Nations SDGs. It's a framework that was like basically created and agreed upon by all United Nations member states back in 2015. And they really do a good job of highlighting the breadth of sustainability challenges. It's not just about waste and recycling. It covers a variety of like social, economic, and environmental and ecological dynamics. And they're also quite a useful framework to highlight, there are different ways that you can draw connections between these goals. They don't live in their own like compartmentalized groupings. They're very much all interconnected with each other. I guess just a quick pause on here is like having looked, or you might have also be aware of the SDGs in the past, but it'd be lovely, I think, just to quickly ask our audience, like which SDG do you think is perhaps most relevant or applicable to any of the subjects you teach or your role? It would just be really nice to hear like how relevant those are to you at the moment. So feel free to like put in the chats or raise your hand. Yeah, Larissa.
Hi, so last year I done the teaching and I focused on sustainable cities and communities, and I organised a little pick for a class group to promote like highlight all this. This is a way that you could like walk to the college, and why is it so like messy, dirty, and the need to like remember to like reuse, reduce, recycle. Um, and do the litter pick, and they were like shocked to see how much litter they could pick up, and it ended up being a bit of like a competition to see kind of like what parent could pick up the most litter. So that was kind of good. So I was teaching them about like sustainability and how they should like maybe think for them not to drop like litter in the future.
Nice.
And this year, because it's quite good because March ties in with International Women's Day as well. So it's really easy to focus on number five,
Yeah.
the gender equality. So this year, I'm doing like a kind of like information setting session about like like famous like women who have like cycled, walked, wheeled kind of like around the world, or like Olympic athletes, things like that, just to
Yeah.
highlight that, it should be equal. And sometimes I feel like a lot of women don't get recognition with like these kind of um things. So it's just talk about like maybe famous women that people haven't heard about or know
Yeah.
about.
Yeah. No, I really like that. Thank you for sharing those great examples, and also great to hear that you're continuing to engage with the teaching and it can align with like those like yeah sorts of awareness days. I think you touched on a really interesting point about I guess like using quite raw topics in sustainability, so things like litter picking, reusing, recycling, as a way to like hook people into this because we know how big and messy and quite overwhelming, I must admit, the field of sustainability can be. So using quite tangible ways to engage students as like a starting point can be really valuable, especially when they're always like bombarded all the time with like information. So doing something that is quite practical is one great way to engage students on the teaching. And so for those on the call, like if you are this doesn't have to be like just like reserved for in-class activities. They can very much be looking into getting students involved and actively learning about like the built environment or the sort of what we call like the hidden curriculum, the things that they learn by just being at college or on campus or even online learning, the sort of like infrastructure and cultures of learning as well. So yeah, those are some great examples. And yeah, I think it's an interesting framework in that there are different like benefits to having this as like a framework for education, and not only because they illustrate the like linkages between those different social, environmental, and economic challenges, but also because we do know they do have quite a lot of the SDGs have quite a wide international recognition. It's very much like a shared language within sustainability across borders and sectors. And for me, I also feel like because they're quite, but they're relatively accessible to understand, they're quite a useful like conversation starter, especially for those that may not be aware of like the sort of diverse topics included within sustainability. And this is something that we've also learnt again from students in their reflections on the teaching. The students said how learning about the SDGs helps us understand the importance of taking action now and empowers us to make informed and responsible choices. It also encourages us to think globally or acting locally, showing that even as students, we can contribute to positive change in our communities and beyond. That thing about, I guess, like thinking globally, acting locally, that's a phrase I remember being learning about during A-level geography. And it has kept with me since. At first, I thought it was a little bit cheesy, I'm not going to lie. But the more I work in education, the more I think actually, phrases like that can be really useful as a quite a simplistic but accessible way to highlight we're not just sort of going about business as usual in sustainability, but we are really much engaging with big, messy topics that can still show up in our daily lives as well. But I guess despite all of the like really various strengths of the SDGs as a framework, we also are very much adamant on like the need to critically engage with this framework as well. They are not flawless, and as education institutions, we do have like a sort of duty like we feel to have to highlight to sort of do critical thinking in practice as well. So there are some like limitations that should be recognized, and there are different ways that you yourselves and your wider teams and institutions can go about with helping to address those limitations as well. So just some to highlight, there are quite a lot of like contradictions between those goals and their many targets. The one of the most starkest ones is are the goals around like climate action, goal number 13, and its tension with goal number 8 on good jobs and economic growth. We know that drastic climate action will require drastic, like transformative changes to society, politics, and economics, which does come into a bit of a contrast with a goal that pretty much still promotes sort of like infinite growth on a finite planet. The goals also sort of make us question like what are they sustaining or what systems are they sustaining? Who like what sort of like perspectives or groups are they disproportionately sustaining over others? They also don't really sort of confront the like various extreme wealth inequalities we see around the world as well. And also perhaps for me, the most like strongest weakness to these goals is that they lack addressing the root causes of the various challenges we see, as well as providing alternative, like transformative alternatives that don't just tick a box or address symptoms and not root causes. So those root drivers we're looking at are things like the sort of underlying systems of oppression, the legacies, as well as ongoing forms of colonialism, and the various ways that we see that happen at different levels, both through like ecocides, animal and genocides, as well as wider forms of like white supremacy and capitalism. And so we hope through like the teaching that educators and learners are able to not only engage with the SDGs because we know how useful they are, but also actually be a bit creative, think outside the box, embrace other related topics that we know are crucial to finding a more just future. So things like climate justice and ecological justice as well. This is a really lovely graphic that I love to share with people. It comes from the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. And it's basically a useful like fungi metaphor on like decomposing the underlying causes of our various forms of social and environmental crises. So just to sort of like highlight this, so you've got like raindrops representing equity and justice, adaptive learning and action, and also like growing more reciprocal, respectful human nature relationships. Those are then like sort of like helping to decompose those underlying causes of our climate and biodiversity crises. So things like the concentration of power or prioritization of short-term goals over long-term gains and things like that. And then all of this helping to nourish the roots for transformative change for a more just and sustainable world. So graphics like these, even as like a teaching tool or a sort of way to stimulate conversation, can be quite powerful to highlight, yeah, just the sorts of systems that we're looking at and that we know need to change and to be transformed for sustainability. We will also, of course, share the like resources and links and stuff like that in the slide deck that you'll get afterwards. So no need to like draw that diagram or anything like that. So yeah. I also mentioned earlier on about the FE Just Transition Framework. This is, you might have already heard of it, or you might be actively deploying it within your own contexts. But just to sort of highlight this, so a just transition usually is sort of talking about the importance of leaving no one behind as we transition to a more climate and sort of climate-friendly future. So very much looking at like maximizing opportunities whilst also minimizing and managing any challenges that can be experienced by workers, especially around their like livelihoods and well-being. So this framework was created in collaboration through many trade unions and the Association of Colleges to basically provide some really like tangible, concise steps for how you can embed this kind of mentality into different parts of your organizations. So all the way from like leadership and whole organization approaches to things like workplace culture, staff well-being and training, as well as like monitoring impacts on students and staff. And in this framework, which is available easily available online, it also features like examples of like good practice and sort of like steps for weaving sustainability and a just transition into like daily and strategic functions of your institutions. If you haven't heard of it, I definitely really recommend checking it out. And it's a very like, yeah, useful thing to get started with, basically. So I also wanted to, I guess, just pause here for now. We've covered a lot of like scoping the sort of like big picture of sustainability. I guess my question for you lot now, just for like the next 5 minutes or so, is to sort of get you thinking about how you can join the dots between your subjects or professions with sustainability. And my question for you, first of all, is like, how is or will your subject or role maybe be like impacted by different social and environmental challenges? So that could be like really specific ones. It could be just in general. It could be like sort of more thinking like big picture, maybe like how, for example, the climate crisis relates to your subjects. And yeah, just to get just a way to like help join the dots really between these kinds of topics. So feel free to again to like as well put anything in the chat or raise your hand as well. So nice, so a nice comment from some of the chats. So government funding and public perception, especially surrounding cycling. A lot of the media is negative around surrounding cycling, but whereas I see it's just a cheap, easy way to allow students to be more sustainable regarding commuting. Yeah, so again, like really good example again of like sort of relating sustainability to like the sort of actual active transport that students and wider stakeholders might do. And again, that interesting bit about like external stakeholders and perceptions or public perceptions. I think that's quite an interesting one. On yeah, there's so much that we're sort of told or informed or persuaded by in media on certain topics like cycling. And there's a need as well, therefore, to sort of yeah, engage with that critically, and instill like how we can embed those kinds of approaches or sustainable transport within education. I guess then another sort of question, sort of then related to this, is how can your like subject or role might with like support with making a difference to sustainability or a just transition or climate justice and things like that. Again, you can think even broadly as well. So like the wider, for example, philosophies behind the subjects you teach or you learn about. I know we've got some people in the room in our cyberspace from different disciplines like communications and others. So yeah, maybe thinking about like what how are you already seeing maybe ways that your subjects and are like equipping students to be change makers in these kinds of topics as well. We'll also return kind of back to this question throughout, to be honest. So we can also like reflect on that throughout the session too. I can see that some people just type in the chat as well. So feel free to continue to add your, oh, there we go. Yeah. Yeah, so yeah, teachers can encourage students to change their behavior and sustainable lifestyles. Yeah, so I know we also have, we're actually joined by students in this call as well. And it'll be really nice, I think, to get your thoughts throughout this workshop too, to get that both those perspectives. And yeah, I think a lot of the ways that students can sort of students learn a lot from like their institutions, and not just through like taught content, but also through like just being at college or in their learning in general. And a lot of that can have like quite a lot of like ripple effects on their future, ways that they embed those kind of like lifestyles, both personally, in their families, friends, and like wider spheres of influence. So again, like there are different ways that all subjects can sort of, no matter like the focus, within those topics, that they can uh, sort of like leverage the diversity of sustainability as a field to intersect of how that subject can inform it as well. Um, Great. So I'm just going to move on now to this like transformative way of addressing sustainability in education, which is known as like education for sustainable development. You might have heard of this before, or you might be also actively instilling it within your own courses. But basically, it refers to about like ensuring that all learners of all ages are like equipped with not only the knowledge or understanding, but also the very much the tangible skills, the values, and agency to address the various interconnected global challenges that we see around the world. It's very much like a lifelong learning process. It's also like integral part of education, and it's not just what students are learning, but actually also the environment in which they're learning within, and the wider like teaching and learning methods and the sort of systems in which they learn and be within as well. There are some really useful like competencies that UNESCO defines to help with like that students can be sort of equipped with so that they can feel confident in actually addressing these challenges in their careers and daily lives. So these are shown on the slide. So things like they span all the way from things around systems thinking. So this is quite a good one, probably one of my favorites as well, because it highlights like the need to sort of like train students on how they can join the dots between different topics, understanding and analyzing complex systems, and then also looking at like mapping the relationships between what they might see as different or separate issues, but actually have a lot of shared similarities. So for example, just to give a more concrete example, this could be looking at like the personal, local, collective, national and international scales of sustainability challenges, or for example, getting students to reflect on the stories behind what's on their dinner table, or how like every bite tells us a different story of the supply chains. It can also highlight things like to sort of relate your subjects and like taught curricula to different topics as well. And again, as the person earlier on mentioned, like there are ways you can sort of line that with like awareness days and make the most of like building the momentum on those topics as well. It also includes things like futures thinking or futures literacy. So this is the idea that, like for example, getting students to understand or evaluate different outcomes, looking at cause and effects, dealing with risks or changes, and envisioning alternatives. I think this is really especially a nice one for like looking at like storytelling. So for example, getting students to share their stories on what they see their neighborhoods as post 2050, or what does a climate just future look like to them? What can they see? What can they smell? What can they feel? Futures literacy is also a great way to think to like highlight the sort of different ways that creative forms of learning and teaching can be of great value in sustainability as well. Then moving on to things like strategic thinking, so planning. There's also competencies around values or normative thinking. So this is very much looking at like reflecting on the norms or values that underlie people's actions. It can also look into things like debates or having like open dialogue or reflective assessments, like journaling and diary making can be quite a useful way to get students to sort of harness and develop those skills. And then of course you have things like collaboration, teamwork. We also know that there's like a lot of these skills relate to the kind of skills that employers are looking for increasingly, especially in like green jobs as well. And then finally as well, things like critical thinking, self-awareness and problem solving. very much like all of these are transferable and applicable to different subjects, not just certain types. And again, all subjects will have their own like sort of way to like approach these skills, and yeah, train students to develop them as well. One way, I guess, to put this, to sort of understand these competencies is through like the idea of like head, hearts, and hands. So the head being things like the ways of thinking or knowledge. So those skills, competencies we looked at, like systems thinking, futures literacy, strategic thinking and planning. The hands refer to things like slightly more practical or like ways of sort of putting in practice those ways of thinking. So things like collaboration and teamwork, all key to that, as well as problem solving, change making, and like mediation or conflict mediation. And then finally, heart. So this is like ways of being. So very much about what I often say, like what gets you out of bed. It's the sort of like emotional awareness. It's the skills of like active and deep listening. It's things like global or planetary citizenship. So highlighting how we are all part of like a wider community on a shared planet of fellow peoples and non-human animals. All of these can be really a useful way to highlight how your existing curricula is already perhaps aligned with some or several of these competencies and areas that maybe you want to consider building more on as well. I'd also mention as well that all of these like head, heart, and hands as a group is when it's most powerful. If you're just equipping learners with like the head and the hands, so knowledge and practice, that means that students are like likely to be quite like ready to act on these like sustainability issues. But then when you include the heart as well, that means that they're not only ready to act, but they're also willing to act in the long term. That sort of like motivation to act is also really key as well. It's not enough just to be equipped with knowledge and the skills. We also need to see that like values-led side to this as well, particularly when we think about continuity to sustainability in the lives and commitments of people beyond education. And so these are just some like really like very small snapshots into the various like methods that you can go about weaving ESD into teaching, learning, or assessment, as well as staff training. So things like looking at schemes of work or schemes of learning, assessment, and reflections, maybe identifying how existing learning objectives or taught content relate to the SDGs and ways that you might want to go about to amplify that. Um, Students also consistently tell us in the skills survey that they like to have tangible project-based or experiential learning. And so, yeah, you could consider maybe ways that you could collaborate with other colleagues within your institutions. Perhaps those aren't even actively involved in teaching, for example, estates and facilities or marketing, and how students can actually sort of learn from what they do in their day-to-day lives as well. Also thinking about like collaborating across your organization. So this is both regarding the teaching and beyond. One great way to like make the most of this is to like almost like identify those stakeholders or groups or people that you know you want to do more like partnerships or alignment with, but you're not sure how to get started. Or the teaching and ESD is a great way of highlighting that or getting a start on it. And there's so many different ways that we've seen um, colleges sort of work directly with like student associations or clubs or societies, and how that can usually make it like the impact of those initiatives even more powerful because you're engaging with students from the very start. It's student led, and it's sort of meaningfully relevant to them as well. Other examples include things like creativity. I am technically like an eco-poet, so I'm very much biased about creativity and sustainability. But I do know, like from experience, that this is a great way to not just make sustainability education fun, but actually also almost like uh, attract those that are perhaps beyond the green echo chamber. So the green echo chamber being people who are like already very passionate about these topics. But we know that there are people who exist beyond that who maybe are curious, but they don't know how to get involved, or they don't see how sustainability is relevant to them. And so there's a need to be a bit creative how you might sort of address that challenge. I think that was also a challenge that someone raised earlier on as well. And so creativity or like non-conventional forms of education can be a great way to like sort of hook those students and get them involved as well. And of course, things around nature-connected learning, outdoor education, there's so much really innovative examples of that happening around the world. And as mentioned, teaching and learning is not just for students or young people, but also for staff as well. So how might you go about ensuring that ESD is embedded into staff training programs or quality processes or program reviews and things like that? By embedding ESD by design, it means that it helps with making it almost like the norm rather than like, oh, let's embed ESD or let's do it like in a sort of tick box exercise, because we know that's not how we're going to get the transformative changes that we need. Just to go a bit further as well into like the power of creativity for ESD. So it's really useful, I think, to like as staff yourselves to almost sometimes like step back a bit and connect like specific SDGs and their targets to like maybe specific areas of like your learning objectives. Some might be more obvious or clear than others, but in most cases, we know that often staff are already engaging with ESD at some level, but you may not realize it yourself. And so if you don't realize it, or you don't realize the skills that students are already gaining or the topics they're already learning about, then it can be difficult for students to know what green skills or transformative attributes they're developing through their studies as well. So highlighting those connections can be a really great way to sort of highlight that. Also things like interactive games. So I think the person earlier mentioned about like different, like making sort of like gamifying sustainability or making it into like a competition. Again, those can be really useful like interactive engagement activities for students. I've also put an example here on like maybe mapping the relationships between the SDGs and students' own like personal interests or career interests. This can also help like make sustainability feel more like relevant and grounded to them rather than just some abstract topic that's spoken about in a very generic way. And then finally as well, continuing to use like art-based methods to hone student skills in different ways of communication. There's loads of like examples out there on like, for example, using role play or simulated activities or zines as pedagogy, as well as instilling creative sort of assessment approaches within formative or summative assessments. Of course, these are like how these appear in practice will sort of like vary across your institutions, but hopefully these are just some ways that might help you think about ways you can creatively embed ESD as well. Just to like, I guess, highlight a really nice case study example of this in practice. So last year and the past few years, Gateshead College has been taking part in the Teach In. And last year they spoke during our like reflective webinar about how they've engaged students both with like about and beyond the SDG topics. So looking at, for example, active travel, as well as topics around digital poverty and global citizenship, and things around food waste, fashion, and leadership in business. They've also adopted quite interesting like approaches to the teaching, going beyond the classroom. So looking at aligning it with like National Careers Week, as well as quite active like real life learning for students on like repairs and like clothes swapping and donations, and even a very cool looking fashion show on like upcycling materials. And so these are just some examples of how institutions are like approaching these topics from a more sort of like interactive and engaging way for students. So I've spoken for a little bit about like the sort of like the audience being students, but we also know that it's so crucial to look into actually supporting staff directly with embedding ESD into education. We've seen that from, like, as mentioned, the AUC's State of the Sector report, as well as the general conversations we have throughout UK post-16 education. I just wanted to highlight one framework that might be of interest to those on the call and the recording. So this is known as the Rounder Sense of Purpose framework. And it's basically designed by a group of like international education institutions for educators at all levels who wish to like enhance their capabilities in education for a more just and sustainable future. And it's a really nice way of not just visually, I quite like that picture, but also it's both includes competencies related to ESD that I mentioned earlier, but also it goes a bit beyond them as well. So it includes competencies, for example, like creativity or empathy and transdisciplinarity as well. We know these are all like key sort of like competencies that can make an educator who is able to sort of adapt to the evolving nature of sustainability and what it means for your own subjects and contexts. This framework, this is all available online. Also, like gives some details about exactly what it means by these like transformative competencies for ESD for educators. And it, again, highlight there are many like interconnections with the SDGs in general and ESD, but also looking at a bit more deeply into like the value side of this and the sort of the like inner motivations and desires and passions of you as educators yourselves. There's 12 competencies in like in total, and they are quite like action orientated. So it's not just too like generic. It's very much like active and transformative pedagogy informed. And also a really nice part of this resource is that it also includes like suggested teaching activities related to those competencies and each of the SDGs. So this could be a really great resource to kind of like have a look and maybe get inspired about the sort of maybe you've noticed there are some SDGs that your courses don't directly relate to, but you want to expand on. This could be a really useful resource for suggesting some ways of approaching that. And of course, you're welcome to like tailor and adapt these as you see fit. So those are just like I guess some like an overview of like the really broad terrain of education for sustainable development and some hopefully useful guiding frameworks for it. I'm just going to pause for like a minute or so, just in case anyone had any questions or if I need to like clarify anything a little bit further. I'll just double check the chats. Yeah, I think is it Judith? I don't know. What does HNCCAD stand for? Maybe that's, I'm not sure if that's an acronym that I should know. Um, that sounds really interesting though. I want like 3D printing. And hi, Marielle, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. We're just talking through examples of how people can embed sustainability into their courses. Oh, interesting. Okay, the higher national certification in computer aided design. Yeah, so that's a really interesting example, and I'd actually love to hear more about that. So yeah, looking at ideas about 3D printing and how it could be more sustainable in terms of materials used and recycled, etc. Yeah, exactly. So I actually touched on a really good topic about like when we talk about sustainability in education, it's not just like in general, but also looking at the very ways that we teach and the equipment and things we use. That can be a really good way to highlight like it's not just what we're looking for in the future, but actually what we have at the moment and how we can make that sustainable socially and environmentally as well. Nice. So I'm just going to share a little bit now about what is a very useful way to get started and also still to go further with embedding sustainability into education. This is something that we call like student-led sustainability curriculum mapping. So basically, we can support colleges and universities with mapping the SDGs as well as the green skills and ESD teaching and learning methods through a like student-led curriculum audit. This is something that we've developed, the methodology for this, we've developed in partnership with the University of Winchester and Winchester Students' Union. And it is a really, like, it can be a really fantastic way to engage students meaningfully with how sustainability is already covered in their curricula, whilst also developing a variety of skills for them as well. And so, yeah, we've been sort of supporting colleges and universities with this for several years, reaching around 500 students and mapping like 7,000 modules or lessons, um, and the different ways that, yeah, sustainability can appear or could be improved within curricula as well. I wanted to highlight it because there are different like benefits to doing this in general, as well as for the teaching. So one of them is that it can help establish like a very useful like quantitative baseline to track progress in weaving sustainability over time. The Teach In being an annual campaign is a great way to spotlight, for example, like identifying unknown like areas of good practice, and so can inform these kinds of curriculum mapping initiatives as well. And we know that obviously it's very important to like track progress, impacts and outcomes, evaluation and so on over time. Otherwise, it's hard to know how much that we're doing is making a difference. It's also a really useful way to like identify like good practice that you may not know of that's happening in the institution, and therefore what you can learn from that. We've also found how during the actual curriculum mapping, we train students to do it, and then during the actual mapping of their courses or course specifications, we find that there can be some really nice, enriching conversations and dialogue between students and their staff, including staff that they may not usually get a chance to speak with, or like curriculum designers and wider teaching or non-teaching staff members. As mentioned as well, like there are various like skills and experiences that students can develop as part of this activity. So not just systems thinking, but also like teamwork and leadership. And then finally as well, this is a great sort of like activity to link with wider institutional strategies or policies and agendas. And it is quite a synoptic activity. So yeah, the recommendations that we can provide for moving forward can also help align and progress these agendas too. One of the like most common themes to the feedback we get from student auditors is that they learn how teaching has a larger purpose than just exams and assignments. And that's a really like bang on what we want to hear really, because we know how like so often students can feel that they're just focusing on their marks, their scores and so on and grades. But actually we know how education is a form of like liberation. It can be a liberatory process. And so being able to be empowered to actually map their own curricula and suggest ideas or ways forward for their own institution can be extremely fulfilling for students as well. And just to highlight a very clear synergy between the teaching and curriculum mapping, for the first time, we are offering for all institutions that reach a spot on either of the final leaderboards in the teaching, so either somewhere on the top 10 institutions with the number of educators pledged or learners reached, that you'll be able to gain training for curriculum mapping open to all students from those leaderboard institutions, as well as receiving support for students to map just like a month of learning experience. And then you'll also get like a copy of that raw data. We'll also share like the collective findings. And of course, well, you get the many like students gain the many different skills, benefits of that. And so, yeah, this offering is being sort of like included as like a subsidized, accessible cost for those that reach the final leaderboards. And yeah, if you have any questions about that, feel free to get in touch. I will have my like email at the end as well, so that's all good. And then I guess just highlight a good example of like how curriculum mapping can lead to like really impactful long-term changes. It's not just like doing it and then forgetting about it. It's very much actually doing it and actively using it in the long term. So one great example is from City College Plymouth. We worked with them with 15 students and staff to map about 150 schemes of learning, assessment and reflection documents against the SDGs, green skills and ESD methods. And as a result of that mapping, the findings were shared by like student leadership groups, as well as published on their websites and embedded within staff CPD. And even going above and beyond, the college also used it to help inform like revalidation reports of courses like their access to HE diploma. And also now ESD is now like incorporated into like program quality reviews. We also see a very similar approach to this happen in wider work that we do with colleges and universities on how you can embed ESD within like the sort of like program quality infrastructures. They have a lot of power. And so, yeah, it's a great example of embedding ESD by design. So just to give, I guess, some more tangible or practical advice for engaging with teaching for this year, much of this also applies to future years as well. So teaching will be starting very soon, just next week. I can't believe it's already February. But yeah, so the teaching this year will last for the whole of March. In terms of who can like actually sign up and complete the like sign up form, basically anyone in like an education capacity, so teachers, educators, or workplace facilitators, student union or student union officers are also welcome to pledge as well. And in terms of like which institutions, so not just colleges, but also like early years, primary, secondary, adult and community-based education and more. And in terms of like the structure, so we've put like these optional weekly themes just to help you, if you want to, like to help break down the big messy world of sustainability. So in week one, or across each of these weeks, I'll be sending like recommended resources and updates to those that consented to receive emails on the teach-in about these kinds of themes. So the first one being on environmental and ecological sustainability, then social, and then economic, and then the final week on like care, collaboration, creativity. That final week is a nod to like the importance of like values-led approaches to ESD and education for sustainable development. And yeah, and throughout all of that, we'll be like spotlighting different resources that are showcased in our evolving resource bank, which I'll get into a bit later. If you do have any questions about like the structure, feel free to as well to write those in the chat, and I'll get to them a bit later as well. So I mentioned the SDG Teach In resource bank. So this is accessible throughout the year, not just in March. And it's basically you can set like a go-to source of like inspiration for different multimedia resources that are relevant to different levels and subjects. So it covers not just like sort of white papers, but also like videos and sort of multimedia guides and comics, ways to like interactively engage students on sustainability topics. It covers all those different dimensions, those pillars of sustainability, and also with examples of like case studies or ways to embed more like nature connected or eco-centric forms of sustainability education as well. Something that we know many institutions really like from their feedback is the thing at the bottom, which says from art to zoo management, embedding sustainability in UK higher and further education. This is a really useful, like almost like manual for how different, literally, it says a proper A to Z. There's many, many subjects included in that, and how you can tangible examples of how other institutions around the world have gone about embedding sustainability into those subjects. I should also mention as well that if you do come across any resources or things that you've produced as part of your like engagement with the teaching that you want us to share on this resource bank, then please do feel free to share it with us. We want to like highlight what we know is like there's so much good practice going out there, and so we just want to do our best to help to spotlight that and help others as well. I also just want to spotlight just one example of how some institutions have actually used the resource bank. So last year, Forth Valley College, they harnessed the Teaching Resource Bank and the like campaign as a whole to help with leading from the front. And two specific resources that they've now actually integrated, not just through the teaching, but also wider curricula, is the University of West Indies Climate Justice and Literacy Hub. That's a fantastic collation of resources that spotlight quite marginalized perspectives on climate justice. And then another one being from Isaias Hernandez, who goes by the handle Queer Brown Vegan. He's basically a intersectional environmentalist and content creator. They produce some fantastic social media content that is really like just I can't really emphasize enough. It's just really good, and it covers like a very large array of topics, especially those that are topics that aren't often included in sustainability. So definitely just some good shout outs really to some resources that we highly recommend as well. And yeah, so the college for college actually used these sort of resources, not just like tokenistically, but actually using them to like spotlight specific themes around climate justice and the cost of living crisis, gender equality, and air pollution. All of those topics being what we know are like quite clear priorities for students and staff. So yeah, just different ways to like creatively use and adapt those resources. In terms of how staff and students can actually take part in the teach-in, so starting with like educators, of course, the main one being like to complete the online pledge form. That's open right now and it closes at the end of March. Beyond that as well, you're more than welcome to help like promote the teaching to your colleagues and wider networks. We have like an online external communications pack with like ready-made email templates, graphics, email signatures, things like that. Just make it as easy as possible to help spread the word. And you're also as well welcome to like share your stories of how you're engaging with the teaching, tag SOS UK. And you can also like send us case studies. We have a case study template that you're welcome to use. And yeah, if you have any questions as well, feel free to email that email on the screen, which you'll get afterwards as well. I'll also mention that you might know this already, but in the pledge sign up form, we ask educators if we have their consent to share their pledge details with the institutions if they request it. And so that means that for those that have consented that data to be shared, you can actually see who is taking part in the teaching, and even more importantly, actually, how are they already, or are they planning to embed sustainability into their education? That can be some really useful data to have, and yeah, ways to reach out to them as well. Of course, they're only just for those that have consented to have those details shared will be shared with you. If you have any questions about that, feel free to as well to let me know. From a student's perspective, however, it's not just the onus on staff. It's very much actually seeing education as like a democratized process as well. We very much advocate students to not only sort of like share with their professors and teachers how they want them to be involved, but also they can even play a part in even promoting the teaching. Although we have like these ready-made graphics on our communications pack, students are also more than welcome to like literally test their own communication skills or creative skills to help promote the teaching. Maybe they can produce a graphic even better than this one. So yeah, just ways to like help with highlighting that everyone can play a role in education, and students sometimes may not always realize how powerful their voice can be on these kinds of topics. So yeah, again, we have all those like supporting documents on that communications pack as well. In terms of support, I guess for like going further with transformative education, as you might have guessed so far, it's not enough to deliver ESD for 1 month in a year. This is something that has to be embedded all year round in all subjects at all levels. And so to do that, we need to like foster transformative learning environments so that all learners can be equipped with those skills, knowledge, and attributes to be the change they want to see. And so SOS UK runs a variety of like projects, campaigns, and consultancy work that we can support you with to sort of like, yeah, get started and go further. Just to spotlight a couple of these. So one of them is Responsible Futures. This is one of our like, I guess, flagship programs that's been running for the past decade, both within the UK and recently internationally. And this is a really lovely long-term change program where we support institutions, colleges, and universities with training their students to audit how far ESD has been embedded in the curricula. It's also an accreditation framework, and it allows you to access a massive like network of institutions who are doing fantastic work in this space and to learn from them as well. It's not just about sustainability in the curriculum, it's also about within the wider campus, extracurricular activities, enrichment, as well as strategies and policies. And we provide like bespoke support as well for all institutions that take part in this. Another example as well is Teach the Future. This is very much a very like student-led campaign that calls upon for like integrating climate education into UK national curricula, as well as green skills, and promoting and advocating for nature-friendly and safe and sustainable school infrastructure in the UK. They've had some various wins over time, yeah, just there's different ways that students as well from themselves can volunteer and also get involved with Teach the Future and its many important lines of work. And then finally as well, we also offer like workshops and consultancy work. So we can support you and your specific like contexts with, for example, embedding sustainability in education, as well as workshops with staff on things like decolonizing, democratizing and decarbonizing education, and things like research and more other forms of bespoke support as well. If you have any questions about those or queries, then feel free to get in touch at hello@sos-uk.org. So I'm just going to pause there really for as like the bulk of the session, and just in case anyone had any questions or maybe ideas or reflections, And yes, you will get access to these slides and the recording afterwards. I'm also just going to stop the recording now, just in case anyone wishes to ask or chat without being recorded.